In 2008, long before the world had the slightest idea of what was about to happen, Sylvia Browne made a prediction that today, more than a decade later, still sends chills down the spine. She spoke with unsettling clarity about an event that would shake all of humanity in the year 2026, something that, according to her, would completely transform the way we live, feel, and understand reality. The most disturbing thing is that, up to now, each of her words has come true with a precision that is almost impossible to ignore. And what is still to come, according to her visions, is even darker. And it may have already begun. Sylvia Browne was not an ordinary psychic. She was a voice that transcended the rational, a woman who became a well-known figure in the United States and throughout the world, especially among those seeking answers beyond the reach of science. Her calm tone, her fixed gaze, and her direct way of speaking about life after death, personal destinies, and the great changes of the planet turned her into a spiritual guide for millions, but what truly distinguished her were the details. She did not speak in vague metaphors or confusing visions. Her predictions were concrete, precise, and often terrifying. What is most surprising is that some of them seem to come true even years after her passing. Born in 1936 and raised in a deeply Catholic home, Sylvia claimed that since childhood she had been able to see and hear what others could not. She said that a spiritual guide named Fronine revealed messages to her from a higher plane. For decades, she shared those revelations on television programs, radio, and in books that became genuine phenomena. Her followers found in her a voice that restored their hope when the world seemed to be losing it. Even her fiercest critics acknowledged her talent for connecting with the deepest fears and most intimate hopes of the human being. While some accused her of being a fraud, millions felt that her words were a window into something greater, something that human logic still cannot explain. Her legacy did not survive by chance. What keeps her memory alive today is the chilling accuracy of some of her most discussed predictions. In her book published in 2008, The End of Days, she wrote about a respiratory illness that would strike the world in the year 2020. A pneumonia-like condition that would suddenly appear, attack the lungs, spread uncontrollably, and then disappear as quickly as it came. But the most disturbing thing was what she added afterward. That illness, she warned, would return 10 years later. When COVID-19 appeared at the end of 2019, the world came to a halt. Thousands rushed to dust off that old book in search of answers. Page after page, they discovered in amazement that the symptoms, the year, and even the scale of the panic matched with a precision that was impossible to ignore. For some, it was a coincidence. For others, proof that Sylvia had truly seen something that transcended the limits of time. And then the great question was born: if she was right about the year 2020, what will happen with what she predicted for 2026? Because according to her words, that year would mark a profound change, not just a crisis or an illness, but a collective transformation, a spiritual shock that would force humanity to awaken. And as that year approaches, more and more people are beginning to look back and listen carefully to what Sylvia warned about so long ago. Before continuing with this message, if you feel curious, if something inside you wants to understand more, I invite you to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with someone who needs to hear these words, because what you are about to discover may change the way you see the world and perhaps your destiny. Some saw it as a sign that her visions were real, proof that we do not have as much control over the future as we believe. Others said it was only a stroke of luck, remembering that many authors had spoken about pandemics and disasters throughout time, but even the most skeptical had to admit that the coincidence in timing, description, and global impact was disturbingly precise. This opened a powerful debate. Was Sylvia being guided by something beyond human understanding, or did people begin to see patterns simply because they were afraid? When we are confused or hurt, the mind seeks explanations and sometimes clings to anything that provides comfort or a sense of control. Even so, there was something different about Sylvia. She did not throw random ideas into her books. Her messages had structure, timing, and often referred to specific years or conditions. Her tone was serious, never sensationalistic. She was not trying to sell fear, she spoke like someone giving a warning. And now that leaves many people divided. Should we trust what she said about 2026? Should we prepare ourselves emotionally and spiritually for what may come? Or are we giving too much importance to a prediction made so many years ago in another time? The danger lies in the extremes. Blind faith can lead to panic over something that may never happen, but ignoring all the signs simply because they do not fit scientific logic could also leave us unprepared. Perhaps the truth lies neither in believing everything nor rejecting everything, but in observing carefully, remaining aware, and reflecting deeply on what may be unfolding before our eyes, especially as we approach the year she feared most. Sylvia Browne did not stop at predicting a global illness in 2020. For her, the entire decade of the 2020s would mark a dramatic turning point for humanity, a period of confusion, division, and spiritual trials. She described it as a time when people would feel lost, disconnected from one another, and uncertain about what is true and what is false. According to her, this decade would not bring immediate destruction, but something much more dangerous, a slow and invisible change. She believed that the world would begin to lose its sense of direction, not because of a single event, but because of many small changes happening at the same time. Technology would advance faster than people could understand. Trust in leaders would collapse. Families would become emotionally fragmented, even while continuing to live under the same roof. She wrote that people would begin to feel more alone, even when surrounded by others. A spiritual emptiness would silently grow, hidden beneath distractions, noise, and routine. Sylvia also spoke about the weakening of faith. Not only religious faith, but trust in life itself. Hope would be tested, and those without strong roots in something deeper would feel the ground shaking beneath their feet. She warned that the enemy in this time would not wear a uniform or carry weapons. It would live in confusion, fear, pride, and disconnection. But she was clear. This time of instability would not be the end, but a preparation. According to her writings, everything that would happen in this decade would be a prelude to something specific, a moment in the year 2026 that would test the heart, mind, and soul. And only those who remained attentive during these years would be able to face what is coming without collapsing inside. Among all the predictions Sylvia Browne made during her lifetime, the one concerning the year 2026 is the most disturbing. She did not speak of fire falling from the sky, nor of giant waves sweeping away cities. Her warning was far more disturbing because it did not refer to the collapse of the outer world, but to the inner collapse of the human being. Sylvia wrote that in the year 2026 the world would reach a moment of profound spiritual crisis. People would begin to feel that life no longer had meaning. A strange heaviness would fall over entire populations. Many would go through their daily routines feeling empty, disconnected, unable to explain why. It would not be only depression or anxiety, but something greater, a collective feeling of spiritual emptiness, as if something vital had been silently taken from the human soul. The most disturbing thing about her words was the way she described that moment. She said it would not be dramatic on the surface. In fact, the world would appear strangely calm. Technology would continue functioning, governments would continue operating, stores would remain open, but beneath that calm, people would silently fall apart from within. She described the year 2026 as a time of great stillness, when nothing would appear wrong at first glance, but everything would feel wrong inside. Families would grow distant without arguing, communities would lose their sense of belonging, people would question the purpose of life more than ever, and most frightening of all, many would not even realize what was happening to them. According to Sylvia, this would be the greatest challenge humanity would face, not physical destruction, but a silent war within the spirit, where the only way to survive would be through deep faith and inner strength. What makes Sylvia Browne's prediction about the year 2026 even more unsettling is the way she described the true danger, not as a war, an illness, or a natural disaster, but as something invisible moving silently. According to her, it would not destroy cities, but would empty people from within, leaving them emotionally exhausted, spiritually lost, and mentally disconnected from reality. She warned about a force that could not be touched, measured, or fought with weapons. It would move through societies like smoke, invisible but deeply felt. People would begin to feel like strangers in their own lives. Their emotions would become dull. Joy would become harder to experience. Fear would arise for no reason. Many would stop caring, not out of rebellion, but out of exhaustion. Sylvia said it would be as if the inner light of the human soul were slowly going out. This silent collapse would not arrive with headlines or sirens. It would manifest in personal and subtle ways. A mother who no longer feels connected to her children. A husband who looks in the mirror and does not recognize himself. A neighbor who shuts himself away behind a screen and never again has a conversation in person. Little by little, people would isolate themselves even in the middle of a crowd. Sylvia wrote that this invisible darkness would arise from a combination of spiritual neglect, emotional overload, and the growing separation between human beings and their sense of purpose. Technology would play a role, but it would not be the cause. The true cause would be the loss of meaning, the silent cry of the soul being ignored. She said this would be the greatest danger to humanity, not what can be seen in the world, but what can no longer be felt in the heart. Sylvia Browne believed that the signs of what would come in the year 2026 would not only appear in people's hearts, but also in the natural world around us. In her writings, she spoke of strange changes in the environment, extreme temperatures, unusual weather patterns, and natural phenomena that were difficult to explain, but she insisted that they were not simply signs of climate change. For her, they were warnings. Signs that something greater was transforming, something spiritual, not only physical. She described a time when the earth would seem confused. It would rain where there had once been deserts. Storms would arrive without warning. The winds would carry an energy that would make people feel uneasy without knowing why. She said that these changes were not part of a natural cycle, but symptoms that the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds was breaking down. Sylvia warned that science would try to explain everything with logic and data, but that it would fall short. The changes we would see in the sky, the earth, and the air would have a deeper meaning, one that could only be understood by those who still listen with the soul. She believed that the earth reacts to the spiritual health of humanity and that when the soul of the world is sick, nature begins to reflect that illness. She said that as the year 2026 approached, people would increasingly feel that something was not right, not only with politics or society, but with the world itself. Animals behaving strangely, plants dying for no reason, seasons losing their rhythm. To many, everything would seem like simple coincidence, but to those who remembered her words, it would be obvious. The earth is speaking, and its voice warns us that we must pay attention before it is too late. One of Sylvia Browne's most powerful warnings about the year 2026 concerned the spiritual conflict she saw coming, not between countries or religions, but between faith and technology. She believed that as the world advanced in science, machines, and artificial intelligence, something profound within the human spirit would begin to suffer. People would depend so heavily on devices and digital systems that little by little they would lose their connection with the divine. Sylvia was not opposed to technology itself. She understood its value, but warned of a time when people would begin to trust machines more than their own hearts. Decisions that once came from prayer, wisdom, or reflection would begin to come from algorithms. Human connection would be replaced by screens. Instead of turning to faith in moments of doubt, many would seek answers in data and cold logic, hoping to find what only the soul can understand. She described the year 2026 as the moment when that tension would reach its highest point. People would be forced to choose, not between religion and progress, but between living with a soul or living without one. A world where convenience replaces compassion, where speed replaces silence, where artificial intelligence begins to answer questions that once belonged to conscience and faith. Sylvia believed that in this environment many would feel lost without knowing why. They would have access to everything, information, entertainment, medicine, and yet they would still feel empty because what was missing could not be downloaded. It had to be experienced through stillness, reflection, and connection with something higher. This battle, she said, would not be noisy or violent. It would be silent and personal, a quiet war for the human soul, one that each person would have to face in the deepest part of themselves. In her predictions for the year 2026, Sylvia Browne spoke of something that frightened many of her readers, a future in which cities would stop feeling like places of freedom and become silent prisons. She was not referring to prisons with bars or guards. What she described was much more subtle and dangerous. A world in which people would live under constant surveillance without even realizing how much of their freedom they had already lost. She described cities filled with technology, not only designed to help, but to observe, track, and gently guide human behavior. Cameras on every corner, devices in every home. Systems recording every movement, all in the name of security, efficiency, and progress. People would not be forced to obey. They would become accustomed to it, comfortably controlled, accepting it without question. According to Sylvia, this change would not come through force or dictatorship, but little by little, through convenience, fear, and the belief that the system was protecting them. Over time, people would forget how to question, how to resist, how to live outside the rules. They would begin to censor themselves, remain silent, and avoid thinking too much. She warned that this new kind of control would break the human spirit, not with chains, but with silence. Cities would feel sterile, emotionless, too perfect. There would be no room for genuine expression, no air for the soul to breathe. People would live close together, yet feel profoundly alone. And those who tried to live differently, who still believed in faith, intuition, or freedom, would be quietly pushed aside. In Sylvia's words, the city would become a cage without bars. And by the year 2026, many would no longer remember what freedom felt like. Sylvia Browne warned that by that year one of the most dangerous forces in the world would be the silence of those who hold power. She wrote that as society moved deeper into confusion, people would begin looking to their leaders, politicians, scientists, and even spiritual leaders for guidance. But instead of direction, they would find empty words, rehearsed speeches, and cold promises that no longer meant anything. She described an era in which leaders would stop leading, not because they disappeared, but because they no longer spoke with truth. Their words would sound hollow, disconnected from reality. The answers would be vague. Warnings would come too late, and behind the scenes, decisions would be made without honesty or concern for the people. Sylvia wrote that this silent dishonesty would cause something worse than outrage. It would cause a deep and growing fear. As trust collapsed, people would begin to feel abandoned. Institutions that once provided security, governments, healthcare systems, the media, would become distant, cold, and even threatening. Many would begin to question everything they once believed, including laws, systems, and even their own judgment. This would not happen all at once, but slowly, like a leaking roof, until one day it collapses. Sylvia warned that when leaders stop telling the truth, morality begins to crumble. People become confused about what is right or wrong. Rules lose their meaning. Community bonds dissolve. Fear becomes the loudest voice in the room. And when fear takes control, people stop thinking clearly. They begin to follow, not because they trust, but because they are afraid to question. In her writings, the year 2026 was not only a time of external pressure, but of internal collapse, worsened by lost leadership. In Sylvia Browne's vision, there would be a trigger, a single event that, although brief, would send shockwaves throughout the world. She did not describe it in scientific or political terms. She simply called it a moment that will stop the world in silence. It would arrive without warning and would not be a disaster that destroyed buildings, but something that would shatter people's sense of security. She saw it as a sudden event, but not a loud one. There would be no explosions or fire in the sky. It would be something so strange, so inexplicable, that it would shake the confidence of even the most rational minds. It would be as if the rules of reality had been silently rewritten. People all over the world would stop and ask themselves, what is happening to us? The most disturbing part of this prediction was that Sylvia said we would not fully understand it. It would cause confusion before panic, and panic before answers. Governments would struggle to explain it. Experts would offer theories, but nothing would make sense. In the absence of clarity, fear would grow. This single moment, according to her, would be the breaking point. The disconnection of the soul, the loss of faith, the confusion in the cities. Everything would suddenly accelerate after that event. People would begin acting in ways they had never imagined. Some would isolate themselves, others would give up completely, and a few would desperately cling to the truth they still believed in. Sylvia said this would not be the end, but the instant when the world would stop feeling like the world, and from there everything would begin to change quickly and irreversibly. Amid the darkness and confusion that Sylvia Browne described for the year 2026, there was also something unexpected, a silent return to forgotten values. She believed that when the world reached its emotional and spiritual breaking point, something ancient would awaken in the hearts of those who still resisted. A longing for simplicity, truth, and a deep connection with God. She wrote that in the midst of fear, many people would begin to remember what had once given meaning to their lives. Faith, family, kindness, prayer would no longer be simple traditions, they would be lifelines. When systems began to collapse, when trust in technology faded, and leaders disappointed people once again, the human soul would begin a different search, not on a screen, but in the invisible, and many unexpectedly would return to their spiritual roots, not as part of a global movement, but as small individual awakenings, silent ones, born in homes, in conversations, and in hearts that had slept for too long. People who had not prayed in years would surprise themselves by speaking with God in the darkness. Families divided by pride or distance would begin to reconcile. New communities would begin to come together, not because of power or politics, but because of shared faith and hope. Sylvia knew that this awakening would not be easy. It would come accompanied by pain, resistance, and crisis. But when the weight of spiritual emptiness became unbearable, souls would remember who they truly are, not consumers, not followers, not simple cogs in a machine, but beings created with purpose. And in that return to the sacred, Sylvia did not see the end of the world, but the birth of something divine, a rebirth of the spirit. She said that the year 2026 would not only test the planet, but every human being. It would be an inner test, silent and profound, not a punishment, but a revelation, a mirror in which every soul would see its true strength. Without distractions, without masks, without excuses. Identities built on appearances and possessions would fall away, masks would break, and only the truth would remain. The pure essence of the soul, rooted in faith or empty of it. Sylvia warned that this division would not be visible to the eyes, but felt in the heart. It would be reflected in the way we treat one another, in how we speak, in how we remain silent. Those who had cultivated their spirit would be protected, not from external events, but from internal collapse. Because the true meaning of the prophecy, Sylvia said, was not to frighten, but to awaken. To remind us that faith is not a luxury, but the foundation that holds us up when everything else begins to shake. Among her most enigmatic words, Sylvia Browne spoke of a revelation that would come from the sky in the year 2026. She did not describe machines, countries, or phenomena. She only said, "It will be seen by everyone, understood by few, but felt by all." It would not be destruction, it would be an awakening. Something would appear in the skies, defying all human explanation. Neither governments, nor scientists, nor spiritual leaders would be able to provide a clear answer. It would shatter the illusion of control and open the soul to the unknown. That revelation would not bring chaos, but transformation. For some, it would be confirmation that something higher watches over and guides us. For others, it would be a reason for fear, but for the humble, the believers, those who live connected to their spirit, that sign would bring peace. Not the peace of comfort, but the peace of truth. The certainty that nothing happens by chance and that even in chaos, we have never been forgotten by God. At the end of her visions, Sylvia did not speak of destruction, but of hope. She said that although the world would be shaken to its foundations, there would be a refuge that would never collapse. Faith, not only religious faith, but trust in divine purpose, in the invisible force that sustains us when everything seems lost. Because when the world turns upside down, when nothing makes sense and even your own thoughts become enemies, faith will be the anchor. It is not weakness, it is not denial, it is the certainty that even in darkness we are guided, that we were created with a purpose, that we are never alone. Sylvia called the year 2026 the beginning of a new form of survival, not physical but spiritual. Those who endure will not be the richest or the most powerful, but those who remember how to pray, how to trust, how to love, those who know how to forgive when the world is filled with resentment, those who remain calm when fear reigns, those who continue to keep the flame of hope burning when everything seems to go dark. For her, it was not just a prophecy, it was an invitation, a call to awaken, to reconnect with the faith that lives within each of us. Because faith does not belong only to churches or holy days. It is the soul's daily refuge, the light that no shadow can extinguish. In the storm of the year 2026, Sylvia said, The soul anchored in faith will not be shaken, it will rise. If this message resonated with you, I invite you to give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave me your thoughts in the comments. I would love to read them. Thank you for being here, and may God always bless you. M.